Hey everyone, welcome. It's Caleb. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to create a Python web application and deploy this to Amazon Web Services. So the goal here is to get a web page that anybody can go view, and we're going to start from scratch. Now we're going to be using Flask to do the Python web development. However, it's going to be fairly similar with Django, and it's also going to be fairly similar if you're on Windows. You might just need to change a few things here and there. Now, this is, in general, a more challenging part of web development, and what tends to happen is people will build out this complex application locally, and then they'll try to deploy it to some server, something breaks, and they're not really sure what happened. So my approach is we want to isolate the smallest piece of this, which is taking the most simple application and getting that working online, and then we can add components as we go. Once you understand the principles, you might be able to just take those and bring those over to your other applications to deploy. So the very first thing is I want you to open a terminal. I'm in Sublime, so I'm using this Terminus plugin, and this allows me to have a terminal right here in Sublime. And I am in this same directory as what we're working in. And one of the things I want to do here is create a virtual environment, which is basically another step you have to do, but it's going to isolate your web application, and all of the dependencies for your web application are going to be just for that specific application. So that means you can have multiple applications with different dependencies and everything can still work. So to show you this, we're going to take a look at pip, and we're going to hit list, and you're going to get a bunch of different Python packages that we can use in our Python projects. However, different projects are going to have different versions of these. So we want to basically isolate a smaller section to have their own dependencies. So the way you can do this is you can say Python, and then you can say -m venv, and then you're going to name a directory, and I just like to call it .venv. So that's where all of our virtual environment junk is going to go in this hidden folder called .venv. So from here, you can activate your virtual environment, and to do that, you say source .venv, and then we're going to go in the bin directory, and then we're going to go with activate. So this is where a difference on Windows is going to show up. There will likely be a shell script, and you can look up how to launch a virtual environment in Windows if you need a little extra help. Anyways, I'm going to activate this, and you're going to see this .venv on the left, which says we are in our virtual environment. And now when we say pip3 list, you can see there's nothing there. So it's saying I should upgrade, so I'm going to say pip install. And I don't actually know if this matters here, but I'm putting pip3 just to make sure I got everything working right. All right, there we go. So we got the latest version of pip. Now we can install any dependencies that are specific for our project. So to do this, we're going to say pip3 install, and the most important one here is going to be Flask. All right, so we brought that into our virtual environment. So you now should be able to say pip3 list and see that not only was Flask installed, but a bunch of other dependencies that Flask depends on. So that's going to get everything we need for our project. Now, if you want to get this project up in source control or share across numerous computers, well, it's recommended to basically make a list of all of these dependencies, and that way, whenever someone downloads this project, they can install those same dependencies. So the way you can do that is you say pip3 freeze, and then direct that output to a file known as requirements.txt. So that's basically going to list this output. If you don't want it to go to the file, you can just see it. So you can say pip3 freeze, and it's going to give you what the output would look like. Then we're just directing it to this requirements.txt file. So if you open that requirements.txt file, this is what it's going to look like. So that way, when someone downloads this project, they know exactly what they need to get. Then I believe when you need to download these later on, all you would need to do is say pip3 install -r requirements.txt and hit enter, And you can see that we already met all of those requirements, so we're good to go. But if for some reason you didn't have one of those, it would install it for you. All right, so that is a pretty good start, but now we actually need a Python file. So let's go ahead and create a new file, and we are going to just call this application.py. Now, for default behavior, it's actually important to call it application.py. This is what's going to allow it to connect to AWS very easily. However, there are some configurations if you want to try to change that when we get to that point. All right, so this is going to be our application. So what we're going to do is we're going to say from Flask, import Flask. So the first one's lowercase, second one is uppercase. Cool. Now for Flask applications, you're going to see something that looks like this. Application is a new instance of Flask, and you're going to pass in underscore underscore name underscore underscore. Now we can refer to our application with this variable here. You'll also often see it app. However, this is again a convention thing with AWS, so I'll talk about how to fix that later. So let's go ahead and create a very simple endpoint. So we say @application.route and pass in the path in quotes. So this is going to be the default web page. And what happens when we visit that? Well, we're just going to define a function. You can call this whatever. We'll call it hello world. And what's this going to do? It's just going to return a string saying something like sup. Oh, and subscribe, of course. Very professional stuff. All right, so now we have this application. So now we want to run it locally just to make sure everything's connected right locally before we deploy it to Amazon Web Services. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say export Flask app and set this equal to application.py. Hopefully I got this right, and that should temporarily add that to our path, so we should just be able to say Flask run. All right, cool. So when we do that, we get a warning. This is a development server. Do not use it in a production deployment, but we're not, because we're going to just do this for local testing, and then we're going to deploy to AWS. So what this video is doing is it's giving you the solution to this problem here. All right, so let's go check this on the web browser. So we'll just open this up. And hey, take a look at that. It looks like it's working. It tells you to subscribe and it says sup. So now I want to get this up in AWS. So go to AWS, and we're going to do this on the web page. However, you can also do it with their command line interface if you're into that kind of thing. So I'm just going to go to my account, go to the management console, and the way we're going to deploy this is using Elastic Beanstalk. And here you can see my previous deployments. In fact, this was from a video I did about 9 months ago. I left it up because I was planning on working with it, but I obviously haven't gotten too much done with that. So I should probably delete these and save myself some money. Anywho, let's go ahead and create a new environment. And this is going to be a web server environment. So hit select. For this, we're just going to say Flask example, which is the name of my project. And scroll down here. A lot of the stuff we're not going to need to fill out. The only thing we'll need to fill out is Python, and the Python version 3.7 is fine. And we're going to start with the sample application. You're not going to upload your code, although that is an option. However, I don't recommend it because I really recommend you store your code in GitHub and have that automatically propagate to your server. So let's go start with the sample application, and I'll talk about how to do that continuous integration part in just a moment. So let's create this environment, and you're going to get a bunch of stuff in this output here. Obviously, if you are not already on AWS, you'll need to create an account and stuff, and you should get some level of freeness with Elastic Beanstalk for like a year or something. However, just to warn you guys, this is a paid service, so it might cost you like 10 or 15 bucks a month after your free trial is over. So don't forget about that. Pretty much anything in AWS, you should just assume it's going to cost money unless it specifically says it does not. And they're really good at taking your money because they're not going to warn you as you're adding servers and changing stuff. Well, this is going to take a few minutes, so let me take a moment just to share with you guys that I am currently working on a Python course. So if you want to know how to become a Python developer or how to get better at Python, then I recommend you check out the link in the description, because that's going to allow you to basically subscribe with your email, and I'll be able to notify you whenever that course comes out. So that's all I got. End of shameless plug. All right, and there we go. It is done. Okay, so now we need to worry about this part where we get the code. So again, we're not going to upload our code. What we're going to do is we're actually going to go to the services again. And what I'm interested in is called code pipeline. So this is part of a bigger project where you can, do automated testing and deployments. But the only thing I'm interested in is just taking our code from GitHub and getting it on Amazon Web Services. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a pipeline and give this a name. We'll just call it again Flask Example. And everything else is good. So hit next. Now for the source provider, here is all of the different sources of source code that you can use. So we're going to go with GitHub. However, you can also use Bitbucket. This is a service I used to use a lot back when GitHub charged for private repositories. Anytime I want to use a private repository, I'd use Bitbucket. But you can also use Amazon S3 and so forth. So let's just go with GitHub. So then what you need to do is connect to GitHub. Connection name, I don't know, connection, that sounds good. So yeah, you have to go through all these different processes. So we're going to work with Caleb Curry, that's my GitHub account. And if this is your first time, you might get some pop-ups. So go ahead and just accept all the permissions. And then once you are here, you're just going to select the repository. Oh wait, we don't have a repository. We need to go and take our code from our local machine and get that up on GitHub, which shouldn't take too long. So what we're gonna do is go back to our code, exit out of our server just with Control-C, and you need to make sure you have Git. If this doesn't cause something to pop up, then you need to go install Git. What we're gonna do is say git init. So that's going to initialize an empty Git repository. And again, just confirm you are in the right directory so you're not getting anything too confused. And what we want to do is we want to basically take all these files that we have and get them up on GitHub. But we don't want all of the files, like I just said. We only want certain ones, basically the ones you can't generate. So we don't need to include, like, for example, the cache files and all that junk. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a git ignore. So to do this, we can right click and say new file. It's always the hardest button to find on those lists. And we're just going to say .git ignore. All right, so this is our git ignore, and this is where you can put what files you want to ignore. And my recommendation is just to find a git ignore template online. So let's go back to our web browser and find one of those. So we're just looking up Python git ignore, and this should do the trick. So go ahead and copy all of these lines of code. And that's going to be sure you don't push anything into your repository that you shouldn't push in there or that is unnecessary. So we can paste that in here. And you can customize this to your exact application. For example, these are the possible different names for the environment. We got .venv, which is one of them that they put on here, but we don't have all these other ones. Anyways, I'm going to keep that git ignore as is. It looks fantastic. So now let's go back to our terminal and we can say git status. And you can see now it's going to include that git ignore, but it's going to ignore what was originally in there, the virtual environment and the cached files. So once we got all this ready, I would consider this to be our initial commit. So we'll just say git add all, git commit -m init, and that's just the message. So init seems pretty descriptive, right? Hit enter, and now those are all on our repo. Now we just need to get it pushed up to GitHub. So let's go over to GitHub, and looks like we're already on GitHub. So what we can do is we can create a new repository and give it some name such as Flask Example. And we're going to keep this public, and don't click any of these because we are importing an existing repository that we just created locally. So create this repository, and we're going to take a look at these lines because we're not creating a new repository, we're pushing an existing one. I'm just going to take these one line at a time just to make sure everything is nice and clean. So the very first thing is we add that destination on GitHub. Then what we do is we create a branch main. And just as like an FYI, this used to be called master. And I noticed something was different here, but I couldn't figure it out. And then I saw that and I looked it up. And, it has to do something with like slavery is bad, whatever. Anyways, we're going to paste that in there, and this one as well. I don't support slavery. So regardless of what your opinion on the branch name is, you could go ahead and name it whatever you want, but just for consistency's sake, I'm going to stick with what the examples given are. So I'm going to call it main, and then I'm going to push to the origin, this web address, our main branch. So I did all of that. I just got to push. So then we just say git push origin main. Now when we do, oh, did I already do that? Guys, I'm going crazy. Anyways, you should be able to refresh over here, and there's all of our code. Awesome. Let's go back to the code pipeline. All right, so the repository we're looking for is Flask example. If for some reason it's not showing up there, it might just be because we just created it. So you might just want to give it a second, or if you have to, do a refresh and get back to this point. As for the branch, we're going to go with main, and we're just going to go with the default here. So hit next. And the build provider, if you're using something like Jenkins, you can do all that stuff. We're going to skip this stage. And then deploy. We are deploying to Elastic Beanstalk, and specifically the Flask example that we created in the environment. Hit next. And yeah, just go through all the steps. I'm sure you guys can do it. So yeah, we just went through all the steps, and here we are. So it's getting our code. It's in progress. Once that's done, it's going to show up here as succeeded, and then it's going to go on to the deploy section, which is getting our code actually to the web server, which is currently in progress. This is usually the slower one. However, I will just kind of warn you guys, because I've messed this up a few times. When you're coding something, changing it locally, and then pushing it to GitHub, it's automatically going to refresh this and get the new code. And sometimes I look at this and I'm like, oh, okay, it succeeded, it got the code. And I'll go refresh the page and the changes aren't there yet. That's because you have to wait for it to go through the entire deployment, which can usually take a minute or two. So this isn't exactly the most way to test development, but it is a nice way to every now and again push to the server so people can test it out, and you can just make sure everything is working off of your machine. Now, the whole continuous integration, continuous deployment thing can get pretty complex. So for example, you could have an environment to do testing and then an environment to deploy to. So then you might want to, push to the test server every night, make sure your changes are good, and then, once a week push to the deployment server, just as an example. All right, there, it has succeeded. So what we can do is we can hit AWS Elastic Beanstalk. That's going to bring up this application, and then go to this URL here. And hey, look at that. We have this sup.subscribe. But the cool thing here is that this is not local, meaning I could take this web address, I could type it out on my phone if I'm feeling a little crazy, or I could send it to someone to check out this web page. And you can also go into Amazon and get a custom domain, so then you could just have it like calebcurry.com or whatever it might be. Probably not that one though. So just to see this process again, let's go ahead and change our code, and we're going to make this a little bit more formal. Hello there. And we'll say good sir. Add them to the next commit, and we're going to say small change to string, and then you're going to say git push origin head, and git push origin main. See, I'm getting all mixed up. All right, so we got that on main, and then what's going to happen is this is automatically going to grab that code you can see just now, and it says small change to string, and it starts that deployment process. All right, there we go. It deployed. So we should be able to go over here, hit refresh, and there you go. There are your changes. So if this is your first time doing something like this, it's a pretty cool feeling. So congrats. If it's not your first time, then congrats. Anywho, let's go back to our code, and you'll often see Flask applications done with app instead of application. And I think just this is a thing with AWS. For example, if I go ahead and change this to app, and then we push these changes, we'll just add a little message here, breaking stuff. We hit push origin, just main, got it. All right, now over here, we'll check the pipeline. It got the code, and let's wait for this to deploy. All right, so it deployed. Now let's go ahead and do a refresh, and oh, it's broken. So if you get to this point, you can go ahead and go to Elastic Beanstalk and open your environment, and there should be these logs on the side which you can request logs if you want to read through that, and you can look up logging because I'm sure there's different tiers of that. But honestly, I don't really understand anything they're saying, so let's just go ahead and take a look at our code and fix the problem. So you can see we have app as the variable here, and it needs to be application for AWS. So the problem is, obviously a lot of people just like to use app for Flask. So the easiest fix is just to make an alias where app is equal to application. So now these will both point to the same area of memory. Now there's also configuration for Elastic Beanstalk. So if you go into your environment and then go into environment, configuration, and then you should be able to go in and just change some of the stuff, like just look for what's available here. So yeah. Anywho, this is what I'm going to do. It's easier. So then we'll just say git add, git commit. Got to be very descriptive. All right, so I just pushed that. And giving it a refresh, you can see it's fixed. All right, so that's the basics. If you want to build upon this, then go ahead and develop out an API. So take post requests and, work with a database. And maybe that's something I will do in another video coming up soon. So please be sure to subscribe if you're interested in more Python web development. And yeah, thank you so much. I will see you all in the next one. Before you go, if you have any issues and you work through them, go ahead and post them in the comments with a solution so other people can figure it out. That way this video is the most useful for people and we can all work together. So thank you for watching. Again, check out my link to my Python course if you're interested, and I'll see you in the next video.